Hi, my name is Tim Maness, and I'm a PhD candidate in religious studies at Boston University. In my research, I'm exploring how science and religion approach the nature of time. I found that studying time leads you to think about the differences between considering something from the outside and considering something from a first-person point of view, what we sometimes call objectivity and subjectivity. So, in our culture, we often treat objectivity as the gold standard, and subjectivity is this sort of subpar thing that we sometimes have to settle for. That's even more true when we think about doing science. The whole purpose of the scientific method, to hear some people talk, is to get away from the mistakes that our individual subjective judgment leads us to make, and to get closer to the objective truth, which by definition has nothing to do with what goes on inside individuals' heads. Physics, the science that I've studied the most, treats things objectively by describing them only in terms of measurable mathematical quantities. For example, if I wanted to describe a table as a physicist, I'd give you its dimensions in centimeters, its mass in kilograms, and so on. The table would be what I could measure. I wouldn't bother to mention who built it or the purpose for which it was built. When you try to describe time only by its measurable characteristics in this way, you end up talking about time as though it were more or less another dimension in space, like length or width. By this standard, we've said pretty much all there is to say about the time of an event if we assign it a spot in a timeline, like, for instance, noon on May 1st, 1990. On the other hand, when people, certainly over the past couple of hundred years, have talked about religion, we've usually put most of our emphasis on the subjective rather than the objective side. And there have been some pretty good reasons for that. As the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard observed, a religious experience is by its very nature one that we can't really capture in words. And trying to describe something that you don't really have words for is hard, for the same reason that it's hard to tell someone else about a dream you had. While you may be able to set out in a dispassionate way the images you saw or the words you heard, it's impossible to get across to another person the strange and powerful meaning that those words or images had in the context of your dream, the emotional details that gave the dream its character. If you can't pass an idea on clearly from your mind to other people's minds, then you can't really treat that idea in anything but a subjective way. Of course, I don't mean to say that religion is all about private subjective experiences that we can't talk about effectively. I just mean that in religious contexts, we have no choice but to think in subjective terms as well as objective ones if we want to address everything that's going on. Now, objective thinking is very, very important. We learn an awful lot about the universe by finding ways to reduce big, complicated, messy phenomena to relatively simple mathematical terms. To a greater and greater extent, we can also use this knowledge to predict the way things will behave under particular circumstances, and that has all kinds of practical benefits, like helping us to cure diseases or build useful machines. Also, it's very important both for individuals and for societies to recognize and look past our own particular prejudices, and to be able to come to an agreement with others about what's real. Objectivity is a good and necessary thing, and I don't for 1 minute mean to disparage it. Still, I think that if we try to live by objectivity alone, we end up missing things that we can't do without. Let's take time as an example again. As I said earlier, when we treat time in purely objective mathematical terms, what we get is just a list of events ordered from earlier to later, with every moment in time just like every other one. The crucial thing that's missing from that view of time is any sense of now, of a unique moment in which we can act, unlike all the past moments that we can remember, or the future ones that we can try to imagine. There's no way to translate that vital distinction among past, present, and future into mathematics. And we need both points of view, the objective one and the subjective one, in order to live our lives in time, just like we need two eyes to see depth. I need the objective view of time, that numbered list of events on a timeline, to say that I'm meeting my friend for lunch at noon. And I also need that subjective view so that I can know when noon is now, the time for me to get up and go. So that's one of the roles that my religion plays in my life, to show me that I need the subjective as well as the objective, the personal as well as the purely rational, action as well as contemplation. If in my life I can integrate that subjective call to action, to know who I am and to be who I ought to be, with the powerful objective tools of science, then that'll be something like success.